Make some tomato pasta. Of course, we get some pasta water.
When your father is one of the most disciplined athletes of all time, repeated failure doesn't land softly. And that's exactly where Brooklyn Beckham finds himself right now. This story isn't just about a family feud. It's about expectations, accountability, and what happens when privilege collides with performance. Over the past weeks, the Beckham family has stopped pretending everything is fine, and the message, subtle but unmistakable, has been loudest from David Beckham himself. Brooklyn Beckham has publicly positioned his split from the family as a fight for independence. But behind the scenes, and increasingly in plain sight, David Beckham's comments, actions and public priorities suggest something very different. Disappointment, frustration, and a growing belief that his eldest son simply hasn't proven himself capable of standing on his own. David didn't name names, he didn't shout, he didn't rage. Instead, he delivered something far more cutting. Measured remarks about mistakes, responsibility, and learning the hard way. And coming from a man who built his life on discipline, repetition, and earned success, those words landed like a verdict. Because while Brooklyn talks about breaking free, his life story tells another tale, one defined by constant reinvention, unfinished paths, and doors opened by a last name rather than merit. And that contrast has never been clearer than it is now. As Brooklyn publicly distances himself from his parents, David and Victoria have done something quietly brutal. They've shifted their attention elsewhere, specifically toward the children who are working, progressing, and most importantly, sticking with something long enough to earn respect. Romeo Beckham is walking major fashion runways. Cruz Beckham is building a real music career, booking tours, releasing work and committing to the grind. And while the family avoids commenting directly on Brooklyn's accusations, their public support of Romeo and Cruz speaks volumes. This isn't accidental. This is strategy. David Beckham's approach has always been consistent. Whether on the football pitch, in business, or in fatherhood, you show up, you improve, you take criticism, you finish what you start. And if you don't, the world doesn't slow down for you. Brooklyn, unfortunately, has built a reputation for the opposite. His first attempt was football, the family legacy. Enrolled in elite youth academies, surrounded by top-tier resources and given opportunities most kids could only dream of. But despite years in the system, Brooklyn never progressed beyond youth level. No contract, no breakthrough, no professional career. Next came photography, major fashion houses, a glossy book, prestigious education opportunities. And yet again, the same pattern emerged. Early access, high-profile exposure, and a quick exit. Projects launched, attention gained, then quietly abandoned. Then cooking, social media shows, TV appearances, viral moments, some for the wrong reasons. Brooklyn openly admitted he had no formal training, no culinary background, and no professional experience. Still, he was promoted as a chef, placed on major platforms and branded as a food authority. Critics weren't kind, but more importantly, Brooklyn didn't stay long enough to prove them wrong. The cycle continued with entrepreneurship, a hot sauce brand, a steak project, a rumoured restaurant venture. Each announcement framed as the real passion. Each one introduced as the thing he was finally serious about. But even supporters struggled to identify consistency, growth, or long-term commitment. This is where the Nepo baby label stops being an insult and starts becoming an explanation. Brooklyn has never lacked access. He's never lacked funding. He's never lacked visibility. What he has lacked, according to critics, and increasingly it seems his own parents, is follow-through. And that's where David Beckham's recent tone becomes impossible to ignore. When asked about children and mistakes, David didn't defend Brooklyn's actions. He didn't echo his accusations. Instead, he emphasised education, responsibility, and learning through failure. The implication was clear. Mistakes are allowed, but they are not consequences. Free. In other words, independence isn't something you announce. It's something you prove. While Brooklyn frames his separation from the family as emotional freedom, the reality is that he remains deeply insulated. He lives comfortably, he works sporadically, and his professional identity remains unclear. That raises a difficult question, one David Beckham seems to be asking privately, if not publicly. What happens if Nicola Peltz leaves? Brooklyn's current life is intertwined with his marriage in every way, socially, emotionally, financially, and structurally. His wife comes from immense wealth. Her family has power, stability, and influence that rivals even the Beckham brand. If that relationship were to end, what would Brooklyn be left with? No fixed career, no independent income stream proven to stand on its own, no long-term professional identity separate from either his parents or his wife. And that's the uncomfortable truth critics keep circling back to. Contrast that with Romeo. Romeo Beckham stepped into fashion and stayed there. He trained, he modelled, he returned season after season. He didn't abandon the lane the moment criticism arrived. He absorbed it, improved, and earned repeat invitations from major fashion houses. Cruz followed a similar path in music. Instead of dabbling, he committed, writing, performing, touring, building an audience slowly, away from spectacle. And when he announced new milestones, his parents didn't hesitate to celebrate them publicly. Victoria Beckham's posts praising Romeo and Cruz weren't just proud mom moments. They were signals. Signals about work ethic, about perseverance, about what earns respect in the Beckham household, Brooklyn noticed. So did the internet. As Brooklyn's accusations went viral, the rest of the family appeared united, visible, and focused. Public outings, Fashion Week appearances, career celebrations, a subtle but powerful message. Life goes on, and it rewards those who show up. David Beckham has never been a man who believes in shortcuts. His entire legacy was built on discipline, criticism, and relentless self-improvement. For him, success isn't inherited, it's earned daily. And right now, the harsh reality is this. Brooklyn hasn't earned it, not yet. He wants independence. He wants autonomy. He wants freedom from narratives. But freedom without responsibility isn't independence, it's insulation. And that may be the real reason this feud cuts so deep, because behind the headlines, behind the statements, and behind the silence, this isn't just a family argument, it's a clash of values. And David Beckham isn't backing down. What makes this moment so explosive isn't just what Brooklyn said, it's how his parents responded without responding at all. David and Victoria Beckham didn't rush to correct the record. They didn't issue dramatic statements. They didn't escalate. Instead, they did something far more revealing. They doubled down on the values they've always lived by, and they publicly aligned themselves with the children who embody those values right now. That silence has been interpreted by some as cold, by others as calculated. But within the Beckham world, silence has always been the loudest language. David Beckham knows media pressure better than almost anyone alive. He understands outrage cycles, headlines, and how quickly public sympathy can shift. If he wanted to shut this down, he could. One interview, one carefully worded quote, one emotional appeal, but he didn't. Instead, he let Brooklyn talk, and that choice alone suggests confidence, not fear. Because when Brooklyn aired his grievances, he didn't reveal a hidden mastermind or a shocking betrayal. He revealed something else. Resentment built over years of unmet expectations, a frustration that seems less about control and more about consequence. Brooklyn framed himself as someone finally standing on his own, but the timeline doesn't support that narrative. He didn't step away from the family to pursue a clearly defined career. He didn't announce a major professional commitment or long-term plan. What he announced was distance, emotional distance, public distance, symbolic distance, but distance isn't direction. And for a father like David Beckham, direction matters more than feelings. David's entire career was defined by criticism. He was booed by his own country. He was written off, humiliated, doubted, and publicly blamed. And his response was never to retreat. It was to outwork everyone else. That's the framework he understands. That's the standard he respects. So when Brooklyn repeatedly pivots from football to photography, from photography to cooking, from cooking to branding, without staying long enough to master any of it, the disappointment becomes unavoidable. It's not that Brooklyn tried and failed, it's that he tried, quit, rebranded, and expected validation every time. That's the core issue critics keep circling: effort without endurance. Even the ventures that still exist rely heavily on visibility rather than proof of skill. Brooklyn's food content draws attention because of who he is, not what he does. His products sell because of the Beckham name. His appearances land because of access, not achievement. And while nepotism can open doors, it can't keep them open forever. That's where the Nepo baby conversation becomes unavoidable. Brooklyn isn't the first celebrity child to benefit from famous parents, but he has become a case study in what happens when privilege isn't paired with persistence. Other children of famous families pick lanes and commit. Acting, fashion, music, business, they struggle quietly, learn publicly, and improve visibly. Brooklyn instead keeps restarting, and that restart button works only because of the power structure surrounding him, his parents' name, his wife's wealth, and the safety nets that make failure comfortable. Which brings us back to Nicola Peltz. Brooklyn has made it clear that his marriage is central to his identity right now. He credits Nicola with his peace, his confidence, and his sense of independence. But critics, and likely his parents, see a dangerous imbalance forming, because independence that relies entirely on another person isn't independence at all. If Nicola provides emotional grounding, financial stability, and social insulation, where does Brooklyn's autonomy actually come from? What happens if that relationship shifts, strains, or ends? That's not speculation, it's a practical question. David Beckham didn't become independent by attaching himself to someone else's structure. He built his own, brick by brick, year by year, loss by loss. And that's why the contrast between Brooklyn and his younger brothers is so stark. Romeo Beckham didn't coast into fashion and stop. He showed up repeatedly, he walked shows across cities and seasons, he earned credibility within an industry that is ruthless even to famous names. Fashion insiders don't invite you back out of pity, they invite you back if you deliver. Cruz Beckham could have treated music as a hobby, instead he treated it as work, writing, rehearsing, performing, touring, slowly building a foundation that doesn't depend on viral moments or inherited fame. That's why David and Victoria's support of Romeo and Cruz feels deliberate. It isn't favouritism, it's alignment. They are rewarding effort, and Brooklyn sees that. Which may explain why his frustration escalated into something public and final. When Brooklyn accused his parents of controlling narratives and prioritising image, he touched on something real, but incomplete. The Beckhams do care about image, they always have. But image in their world is built on discipline, performance, and results. Not declarations. Brooklyn wanted acknowledgement without proof, validation without consistency, freedom without accountability, and David Beckham doesn't operate that way. The most telling detail in all of this isn't what David said, it's what he didn't say. He didn't deny Brooklyn's feelings, he didn't accuse him of lying, he simply reminded the world that children make mistakes, and that mistakes are how you learn. That wasn't dismissal, that was framing. It positioned Brooklyn's outburst not as a moral reckoning, but as part of a learning curve, a moment that doesn't define him, but also doesn't excuse him. In other words, you don't get to burn bridges and call it growth. And while Brooklyn frames his silence as strength, his actions suggest something else. A man still searching for a role, a purpose, and a structure that feels like his own. Until that exists, the criticism won't stop, because in the public eye, Brooklyn Beckham isn't being judged against normal standards. He's being judged against opportunity, against access, against the immense head start he was given. And right now, the results don't match the resources. David Beckham knows that better than anyone. He spent decades proving himself to skeptics. He understands that respect isn't inherited, It's earned under pressure, and he likely hoped his eldest son would learn that lesson organically. Instead, Brooklyn chose separation, and separation without stability is risky. That's why this feud feels less like a family fight and more like a reckoning, a moment where privilege runs out of excuses and effort becomes the only currency left. Brooklyn can still change the narrative. He can still commit, focus, and build something real. But that requires humility, time, and work without applause. And until he does, David Beckham's message, quiet, firm, and unyielding, will continue to echo louder than any statement. Because in the Beckham family, love may be unconditional, but respect is earned. And right now, Brooklyn still has something to prove.